Hi, everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and I am joined once again by author and researcher, the one and only Mr. Grant Cameron. Grant, welcome back.
Thank you, Andy, and it's a pleasure to be on. I've been on before, and you've got a good podcast.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And you have been on before several times now. The last time I had to go back and check was July 2024, and we were discussing what was then the latest book in your series, Beyond Managing Magic. We've talked about UFO sky pilots, which is just behind me. We've got you on this time, and I want to talk about a few things. You've got a book that just came out in February, which is Beyond Managing Magic 2, Landing the Plane, Unveiling the UFO Disclosure Puzzle. Now, folks, that is book 4 of 5 of that series, and we're going to talk about an upcoming book you've got as well. But I think it all ties in really nicely, Grant, to a discussion right now around the UFO topic in general, where things are at, what's going on, and your opinion, I think I value quite highly because you've been involved in this now for so long, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. First off, let's go with the book, Beyond Managing Magic 2. This one takes in recent UFO revelations events. It talks about David Grush, Jim Lakatsky, crash retrieval programs, political roadblocks. So very much in the thick of where we are now. Talk us through the importance of this book in the series.
Okay, the series is one that I never wanted to do. I was never interested in the disclosure thing because it's to me it's a idea of belief versus knowing. That I was up close 5 times in the 1970s, and what the UFO community has sort of been sort of overcome with is outlined in a conversation we had with Dr. Eric Walker, who is in the first book, UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informants. And Dr. Eric Walker, I believe, is the highest level official anybody ever had. We were talking to him in the late 80s, early 90s. He was the chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, which is the top military think tank in the United States. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was the president of Penn State University for 15 years. He helped develop defense policy with Vannevar Bush in the 1940s. And we had these conversations with him. And at one point, he was talking in rhymes and riddles. Nothing really made sense for 30 years. So I went back after a lot of things had happened, and it started to make sense. And one of the things he had said is, he said, "Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity?" And that was sort of a very arrogant sort of statement, but it's sort of come true. He said, "Admit it. You're just curious. Admit it. You're just curious. You just want to know. You have no real reason to know." And I think in the end, he's actually true. It's actually true that if you take a look at the whole disclosure debate, it comes down to people just want to know. They really have no reason to know it. It's just curiosity. They want to know what's going on. And so he's basically saying, why should we change the rules and regulations? And I guess the problem that they have is that if they admit, say, yeah, they're studying UFOs. Okay, so then people say, okay, so what are they? And then you say, well, we got bodies and crafts. And then people say, okay, so where they come from? And it's just one question after another question after another question. And they're all questions that deal with curiosity. We just want to know what's the next thing, what's the next thing. And Walker was the head of weapon research in 1950 for the U.S. government. And when he looked at it, he said, what's the big deal? He said, it's been 40 years. Nobody's blown up the world yet. And so the way they look at it is this whole idea of weapons development and secrecy. And then we're not going to give it to the Russians. We're not going to give it to the Chinese. So when I started down the road on these disclosure books, I maintained right from the word go that they were leaking material to us. And in the book 4, Landing the Plane, the title came from me because in the disclosure thing, I was always very frustrated as to what was going on. And it just, there's one story and then somebody puts another story in. And I get very frustrated. And I think everybody in the UFO community is very frustrated as well, that they just want to know the answer. They want to know what's going on. And basically what happens is that you have a situation where, now I've lost my train of thought here. You have a situation where people are sort of discouraged. And then I got this message clear as day. Now, I don't know if it came from my higher self or from the beings or whatever it was. It said, just give it a break, Grant. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. We know how to land the plane. And I knew exactly what it meant. And that's this whole idea that if you listen to Jim Semivan was asked by John Alexander, the story I heard. John didn't really believe that the government was doing this kind of stuff. And then he asked Jim Semivan, and Semivan said, yeah, it's real. I mean, they've got an investigation and all this sort of stuff. And then John says, well, who's running the show? And I think John meant who in the government is running the show, because he always maintained that, it would be very difficult for the government to do this kind of thing in the secret. And then Jim Semivan said, they're running the show. And that's the basic idea that this book sort of points out, is that the intelligence maybe have done this on 1,000 different planets. They know exactly what they're doing. And what I believe they're actually doing is nothing more than, I used to call it the theory of wow, where they're doing all these weird things. Now I call it the Jesus circus. And it's basically the same idea that Jesus used, that he'd walk on water, he'd feed 5,000 people, he'd raise people from the dead, all this sort of stuff. And the next thing you know, there's a whole group of people following this guy around, and man, he's going to do a miracle. He's going to do another miracle today. And then you deliver the message. So that's what I think they're doing. They're doing these really weird things. Like when I had cattle mutilations, I asked Linda how. I said, Linda, you know why they take every last drop of blood out of the cow? And she says, no, why? And I said, because if they didn't, you wouldn't investigate it. They want it to be as weird as possible, and take a heart out of a cow that without an incision, and everybody's going, what is going on here? Or when I first had my UFO sighting, the first two I had in 1975, I remember the second time I'm looking at it, I'm going, what's it doing? It was sort of just flying away, and I'm going, what's it doing? It's not doing anything. And this is the whole idea, that when people see UFOs, you say, well, what was it doing? And they go, I don't know. It wasn't doing anything. It was just there. And this, the whole idea that they come, they pop in, then they pop out, then they do weird things, and the things have changed over the years. The pattern that they're using is, when I started, there was no crop circles. The cattle mutilations had just started. Ground traces were very prominent. Those don't happen anymore. People speaking light language, that didn't happen. People doing alien writing, that didn't happen back in the 70s. It was a completely different world. And so they do this, and they do this, and then they stop that, and they do this. And so this is what the book was about, is basically this idea that the phenomena is in control of this whole thing. They're unraveling this thing, and we're trying to figure it out on our end. And to me, I just, every time I say, this is the last book I'm doing, the last disclosure book I'm doing, because I think the basics UFO story comes down to the theory of reality, as to, you got to start with a bright premise that consciousness is primary, and go from there. We're sort of spinning off of UFO stories, and it's interesting. If you got a podcast, people want to hear interesting stories, like ghost stories and stuff like that, and that's what we're doing. We're just sort of telling stories, and there's more stories, and then the Nimitz story. And last night I did the 50th anniversary of the Carmen sightings. So the town that had the sightings that I was involved with, they had a big 50th anniversary last night. So I went on there, and people wanted to, me to tell them stories about what had happened, because most of the people, weren't there at the time, or, all the people that were involved are dead. And so that's what it's come down to, but it doesn't really get you any answers. And every time it'll lead to more questions. And then people will talk about catastrophic disclosure, that we want to cover this thing because we don't want catastrophic disclosure. And I say, what could possibly be catastrophic disclosure? Because I've always believed that they're leaking this material out gradually. And because before, I remember in 2009, I wrote an article, the 64 reasons they've decided not to tell you the truth. And I had all these reasons why they're never going to admit they're even investigating UFOs. And then they released it. But in the end, all this stuff comes down to just stories that are told by people and repeated by people. And catastrophic disclosure, people say, well, if they announce that there's bodies and crafts, I said, I guarantee you right now, if they made the announcement, yes, we got bodies and crafts, everybody go, yeah, we knew that already. Tell me something I don't know. And it's just, there's nothing I don't think that could be catastrophic enough, except for when you get into the theory of reality. And when you get into the theory of reality, where we may be living all lives at the same time, that there's reincarnation, that these beings have been, like with Chris Bledsoe, we're with him in his last lifetime. Those kind of things, I think, will be kind of shocking to people. The idea that there may not be any time and space, and that you can go from one point in the galaxy to another point in the galaxy instantaneously, this kind of stuff. I think that's catastrophic disclosure. But in terms of disclosure, the last one I'm going to do is, I'm actually doing the 5th book, is going to be dealing with, I'm going to make an argument that we should stop government UFO disclosure, because that basically has to do with weapons. And we have a situation where we have too many weapons in the world, and now Canada is seen as a national security threat. So why would I help uncover a a cover up and help somebody develop weapons that could be dropped on my grandson. It's this sort of idea that we're in a sort of a different world now. And so I'm going to argue all the reasons why the government is covering this thing up. And some of it makes actual sense in terms of if you're, it's like the fog of war. If you're developing weapons, of course you're going to cover this thing up. That's part of the deal, that the United States of America is actually a very fearful place. I mean, they've got all these enemies and these people, and we've got, a $1 trillion defense budget and this sort of stuff. And it's built on fear, on fear, on fear, on fear, and more fear, and more fear, and more guns, and this sort of thing. And what you've got in the UFO world is you've got levels of security. So you had first secret and confidential, then they added top secret, then they added the code words, and then you went to the waived unacknowledged special access programs and all this kind of stuff. And it just got more secrecy, deeper, deeper, deeper. And that's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to weave our way through these levels of secrecy, which Walker said to us, this whole idea about rules and regulations, and this whole idea that the whole thing is legal. And I maintain this whole thing is legal, and you've got to change the law. Instead of whining and complaining about what they're doing, you've got to change the law. That there's incidents that show clearly that people are read in. And I guess the prime one is, I think we discuss it in this book, is James Lukatsky talks about 2011, where he said we had a meeting in a congressional facility, which means Congress, which means they're talking to Congress. And in the congressional facility, and he said there was a senator in the room, which has been confirmed to be Senator Reid. So at least Senator Reid, one of the gang of 8, was briefed on this thing. He said it was a long meeting, and they were discussing the fact that they had a UFO and they had managed to get inside it, which relates to another story that's just been told by Jack Sarfati. Jack Sarfati says he has a friend in the Navy who ran a program, and they had a craft, and it sounds like the Lockheed craft. And they not only could they not fly the thing, because you need consciousness interface to fly the thing, they couldn't get in it. He said the craft is alive, it's conscious, it has its own free will, and unless you've got the right mindset, you ain't getting inside the craft. And so when I heard that, I went, oh, that's what Lukatsky was talking about, because Lukatsky said in this 2011 they've had this craft for who knows, decades, and then he says we managed to get into it. And this is the whole thing, that this guy that ran the program managed to get in the craft, and he was allowed to fly it, but they wouldn't allow anybody in that didn't have the right mindset. So that's where I'm at, where I say, the government disclosure, we should stop this because they want to build weapons, and we should go to true disclosure, which means talk to the people who are engaging with the phenomena, who are interacting with the phenomena. And hopefully that's the last book I have to write on disclosure. And I'm going to go back to the books that I'm writing on nature of consciousness and how everything fits in. Like, for example, near-death experience, how that fits in with, UFO experiences, where you get someone like Eben Alexander actually encountered aliens when he had his near-death experience, and the publisher pulled it from the book. So you get all these crossovers, and you start to realize this is much more of a complex problem than UFOs. It's a consciousness thing, and it deals with all paranormal phenomena, which are all based on this not understanding consciousness. And once we understand that, then we understand more critical principles like the oneness of everything and the basic force of love in the universe.
A lot to unpack there, and you've jumped over a few points I'm going to make, which is good. But I want to take you back to this idea you've got in the book of the intelligence. This phenomenon is in charge of what happens. It's in charge of disclosure, whatever you want that to be. But does that not indicate, and the difficulty I have with that there is one phenomena and whatever it is working together, that there's a narrative it can shape? Because if you've got an intelligence in charge of this, what about something else that comes from a different dimension, a different reality, something that's here already that isn't involved in that could change that?
Well, that goes to the idea of separation. So you're moving back to the number one rule is oneness. That's the number one rule they want us to know, the thing of oneness. So when you go into there's multiple dimensions, then you're doing is like the Taoist thing. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. Once you name it, you start to separate. Oh, these are nouns. They're inanimate. They're not connected, and everything is connected. Everything is one. For example, if you take a look at the free survey stuff, and talk to 3,200 experiencers as to what they engaged, 40% of them say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. So whatever this phenomena is, whether you're engaging people who claim they're from Zeta Reticuli, or 1896, they claim they were flying these wooden ships from Mars, or whatever they're claiming there are, the principle is oneness. What if the people on the ship had at one point the answer to everything in the universe, the same as near-death experience. 31% of people who've had near-death experiences claim at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. So if you're on a ship and you get this material, the answer to everything, and then they say you can't take this back, that means the intelligence knows the answer to everything in the universe. It knows that everything is connected, everything is one thing, and they don't need to. They're not here to investigate. They're not here to figure out how rocks work or how DNA works or anything. They have the answer to everything. That's not why they're here. They're not here to explore or to steal our stuff. If you look on a craft, whether the Greys or whatever you want to talk about, they don't have any gold, they don't have any silver, they don't have any leather furniture, they don't have any chandeliers, they don't have toilets, they don't have anything. And so once we start separating, we say, well, there's these people, and then there's those. No, it's just one thing. They're all connected, and they would have that knowledge of how everything works. The same as if you followed the Dr. Michael Newton stuff, or near-death experience stuff, that once you die and you go through, you suddenly get the answer. You say, oh, I know how it works now. Or people who do regressions and they're taken into past lives and stuff like that. It opens it up. There is a set of knowledge there that is known to everybody, but you've got to get outside the left brain. You've got to shut down through trauma, through abduction, through whatever it is, that you get into that field and you suddenly realize, oh, this is how it works. And even myself, I did the psychedelic book. I did 27 high dose psilocybin, and I had that experience. Not a full, I knew the answer to everything, but they showed something. There's something I saw, and I went, oh, I see. It was almost like you've seen it before, and they show it to you again, and you go, oh yeah, now I remember. And that's the thing. The separation, we want to separate, and we want to say there's different aliens, and they have different agendas, and all this kind of stuff. And it's almost like the Shakespearean thing. All the world's a stage. All the men and women are bred actors. They have their entrance and exits, and each man plays many roles. We all are etheric beings. We are pretending to play human beings. We are not human beings, and they are aliens. They are etheric beings planning to be aliens, and they have this knowledge of how everything works, as opposed to us, where we believe everything's separate. You just live this one life. It's a random, meaningless universe. We're biological robots. All this kind of stuff. And that's why we have to start on the right premise to understand how reality actually works, rather than spinning off a story that, oh, this alien appears to be different. Because I've pointed this out in the next book. I'll point out this whole deal about, or I'm going to do a book called Extraterrestrial or Maybe Not. And I look at the fact that before 1961, I don't care what anybody says, there was no Greys in writing. Now we've redone the Greys to be in the Roswell crash and stuff like that. But when it comes down to it, you have different beings. You have beings in 1896 were not the same beings we're seeing now, and the beings are changing. If you look, there's a catalog of sightings of humanoids before 1961. You take a look at that. You have little tiny dwarfs, all hairy dwarfs. When was the last time you heard a story like that? Or guys walking around in bubble helmets, and there was piles of them in the 40s and 50s. That's all straight out of science fiction. And Barbara Streisand's stepson told me this. When they told him, when we come into your world, we go into your head, and whatever's in your head, that's what we use to build a lesson for you. We have no other choice. And that's where John Mack said, if you are in fear, you may see a gray. If you are very spiritual, you may see an etheric being. And then you find, I helped one girl do books on reptilians. Reptilian people are very highly energized. People who see reptilians are very highly energized. And the women who do all talk about this sex. It's the greatest sex in the world. They have sex with these reptilians and stuff like that. And you see this repeated pattern that the beings are appearing and we got to realize that we're part of the experience that we're seeing. It's not some independent thing. And that's this reflective thing. If you go to Skinwalker Ranch, you're warned by Brandon Fugel. Be careful. It's reflective. Whatever you bring onto the ranch, be careful. If you take the wrong attitude, you're going to get injured. It's a reflective phenomena. We are part of the phenomena. We want to separate ourselves from the phenomena and say we're victims and these poor aliens and they're doing this to us and that to us and stuff like that. And we got to realize this consciousness thing. It's 1,000 times more complex than people think as to what's going on. It's not just some alien got lost in space and is here and has decided to rape women and do that kind of stuff.
Good place even to bring in the Skywatcher situation. Obviously the book, would the fifth book touch on Skywatcher, Jake Barber and co? Because that's obviously something happening much more recent. It's happening now. He's come out in January.
Yeah.
They've now. Have you seen part 2 of the Skywatcher documentary, Grant?
No, I saw enough of it. I just
Okay.
sort of when I first saw that whole thing about the psionics, I'm going, oh, they just almost like they grabbed my book and rewrote the book, and suddenly, oh yeah, we're doing this too. We're doing this psionics. And then they said, oh, this stuff is not classified. And I mean, if psionics, if the military is trying to bring in crafts CE5 protocols or whatever they're using,
Mhm.
I mean, how can that not be classified? I always think when I see these guys come forward, my first question is always like, why are you not in jail? And I remember like even when you had Elizondo on the first time and you asked him about are there bodies and crafts? Well, I can't talk about that. Yeah, I've got a security clearance. I have to be careful what I say. And now he's completely out there as if someone is watching him and all these guys. And I've always had that impression. The first book I wrote on disclosure was this whole thing that they're leaking this stuff. And because people got to remember that on a security program, on a black ops program, it's 10 times the value for security. So what are they spending that 10 times the money of the program for security? They're trying to spin the story. Like Chase Brandon said, if you want a good read the book. If you want to learn something, read between the lines, where he would go into Hollywood and he would influence people to go in a certain direction on a CIA if he knew the CIA was going to be in a movie, that they're directing the play to go the way they want it to go, to be out in front of the story. So when I saw all that kind of stuff, that was all fine. And it's almost like the same thing with the UFO UAP. You change the name, you change it to psionics, so it sounds really scientific, and then you go with this thing. And when I saw the video, I think they did at Esalen when Gary Nolan was there, and these two little lights that hop high in the sky, and I'm going, oh, come, Stephen Greer could do better than that. I mean, that was like a total joke. And I thought they were bringing them in, and the aliens were coming out. They're on the ground and stuff like that. And it's basically like CE5, or the whole thing I talked about was I brought up the fact that the craft was alive, it was conscious, and that when you want to fly it, you touch it and you become one with the craft, and whatever you think is is where the craft goes. Or as the aliens say to you, there's a number of the sky pilots who said the same thing. They said, it is within you. They first say, where do you want to go? And then the person says, I want to go here. And they go, okay, it is within you. Go within yourself. When you can imagine it, then we'll go there. And that's almost like out of body experience stuff that you go within to go without. That's like remote viewing. Where's the person going when they're remote viewing? They're not going anywhere. You give them the targets 453-709, and they go, okay, I'm there. They don't say, hang on, I'm flying to the target, I'll be there in a minute. They're going within themselves, or the famous expression in all mystical literature, you see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. So the psionic stuff, this is a principle of being able to bring these things, to make contact with them, to engage with them. And I found that all very interesting. But with these whistleblowers, I'm always particular about what are they actually, who's controlling them, who's giving them material. Because to me, it's almost like I'm working on an atomic bomb. There's a new atomic bomb, and I want to be a whistleblower, and I want whistleblower protection. I want to tell people about this new atomic bomb. They'll throw you in jail. I just can't see how these people can walk around and come to me and come to you. They don't go to the New York Times. They don't go to the Washington Post. They come to you and me and say, I'm in this black ops program, and it's the most highly classified secret in the United States, and I'm going to tell you all about it. And I've had a number, and I said, why are you not in jail? Like, why are you telling me? Why don't you tell somebody who's actually matters? And so this is part of the game that they've played forever, is this, engaging stuff, putting stuff in. The Holloman Air Force Base story is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That was confirmed to me and stuff. And you got to realize that this is a very complex game we're playing here.
You talked about mindset and that you can't access and become one with these craft unless you're of the right mindset. It wants you to. And that's something Jake Barber talked about in terms of when they set up each day at the particular area they are performing these experiments, we'll call them, that they say a prayer, they allow themselves, you have to be pure of mind. Is that something that allows you to trust or resonate slightly more with what they're trying to do, albeit folks are rightly skeptical and suspicious about overall motives?
Yeah, well, that's the whole idea is like if you get Brandon Fugel comes in and he said they pray every time they come in. When his brother flies him in on the helicopter, they pray. And you get these lot of examples of this reflective thing, like the three guys that were at Skinwalker Ranch, and they talked about, they were so scared they didn't want to go back on the ranch. This thing happened. And I kept asking, did they have weapons? Were these guys armed? And it was like, yeah, well, of course. I mean, these guys are all like, high level special forces types guys. And it's almost like you say, okay, we're going to hunt the Skinwalker, and the phenomena is neutral. So the phenomena is it's just a power. So it's sort of neutral. So then you say we want to hunt the Skinwalker, and then the intelligence goes, oh, you want to hunt the Skinwalker? Oh, we love to play that game. And then suddenly, next thing you know, these guys are running for their life. Or the one with Rendlesham Forest. I always maintain that Rendlesham Forest, you had three guys there, Peniston, Cabanzac, and John Burroughs, and only one of them was injured. So if this is this whole thing about people being injured and the thing flared up, and they were all the same distance away. So why did only one guy get injured instead of the three guys? All three guys should have had the same heart valve problem that John Burroughs had. And I went through John Burroughs, and John Burroughs maintains, I don't think, I'm pretty sure we handed our guns in at the when we left the base, because you're not allowed to have guns on British territory and stuff. And I don't remember having my gun, but this Cabanzac's only been interviewed twice. And the story he tells is that when this thing flared up, Peniston said, open fire. John pulled his gun, and boom, he got zapped. And so this is this whole thing. Or on Skinwalker Ranch, when they said, do not dig. And of course, what's the first thing they do when they go in there? Do not dig. Okay, let's dig. And the guy that this Tom Winterton, I think his name is, he talks about every single time he dug, something happened to him or happened to the machine. And this is this thing that we just don't want to believe this thing, that there's this interactive quality to this thing. But I maintain there is. And I think the government knows that. I think the government is aware of this kind of stuff, that there's this. In fact, when I had the conscious download, part of it was they gave me a line from a 1950 document in Canada, which this is this top secret memo where Wilbur Smith goes to the United States, talks to American officials, and they tell him a bunch of stuff. Flying saucers are real. It's the most highly classified secret, all that sort of stuff. And then the next line in the document, which was put in my head, where Wilbur Smith said, we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. So they have known that mental phenomena is involved in this thing since 1950. This is not something that Jake Barber suddenly, they're sort of writing themselves into history. Like they discovered this, here's this thing that we're doing and stuff like that. They knew this in 1950. And the important thing in 1950 was how would the Americans know to tell the Canadians that mental phenomena was involved? Because the first engagement with aliens, major engagement, was Adamski. And that was a couple of days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb in 1952. Before that, nobody was talking to aliens. There was people seeing stuff flying around, but there was, nobody talking to aliens and contactees and stuff like that. And so how would they know? Well, they would have known because when we talked to Walker, we said, we talked about the MJ12 document. He said, how do you know they all died? How do you know they didn't get up and walk away? And I'm thinking, holy shoot, I thought he was joking. And then you have the idea that one of the aliens survived and it was telepathic. And of course, if you're U.S. intelligence or DARPA or any of these organizations, you look and you see this alien talking in your head, and you go like, wow, would we love to be able to do that? So they've been working. That's why I believe they did the MK Ultra thing, all that kind of stuff. They were trying to figure out how consciousness worked. They were trying to get control of consciousness so they could dominate the world with this consciousness thing. And they sort of know it. And they actually have, the story that it's not in this book. I should have updated it, but the whole story about Bigelow being given the craft when they wanted the craft. And I firmly believe that was James Ryder that made this offer. He's friends with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, and he was a senior vice president at Lockheed. And the story that's told was that Lockheed could not get this thing to do anything because it had this consciousness interface. They'd had it, and it was costing them so much money because you have to pay for the security to control this thing. and it's not worth any money. So it's a dead weight on the company. And they when they got the offer from Bigelow, they said, okay, if you go to the Air Force and CIA, if they allow it, we'll give you the craft. And then of course the according to the story, the U.S. Air Force said, no, not only are you not going to transfer the craft to somebody else, you have to keep it forever. That's the rule. This sole agreement that we had with you, that we won't identify who you are, you won't identify you're working for us. But part of the agreement was you got to keep this thing under security forever until it's figured out. And so that to me is an important aspect that shows again that the craft, they know the craft involves consciousness, and they don't really have control of it, except that I believe if they have any technology, I would guess that they have portal technology. And I think I talk about it in this book about portal technology, where I firmly believe that they have something. And I refer to my engagement with um, Tim Taylor, where he starts showing me these photographs from the old Hughes Aircraft Building in LA, and he's asking me, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? These paintings of this guy's flying through space and stuff like that. And I'm going, I don't know. And then he basically tells me this is where the jump room was supposed to have been. And I went, that's where it was? And he said, yeah, you know that one with the guys flying through space on the painting? And I said, yeah. And he said, that's right outside the elevator. And I said, it is? And I went there, and sure enough, these paintings were there. And so Townsend Brown, there was this rumor that, Tim Taylor claimed that there was this group that had mastered time travel and stuff like that. And that's where I go in Sky Pilots, where this concept of you just think about it and you can move from place to place, that they may have that. Pandolfi has always indicated this, that they may have this technology where you can actually move from one place to another. So it's the idea that they got these giant ships that take 5 years to get here or something, that all goes by the wayside, where they can actually just pop from one place in the universe to another. And that's understanding this principle, because they understand the principle of oneness. They know how it works. It's all one thing. It's like the spooky action at a distance thing. You can move from one place to another. They understand. We don't understand it. So we think that, it takes years to move from one place to another. And they understand that if it's all one thing and you understand that principle and how it works, you can move from one place to another instantaneously.
You mentioned Jim Lukatsky. In the books he's written with George Knapp and Colm Kelleher, and on the podcast with Knapp and Corbell, he talks about the craft and having a craft that was bigger on the inside than it was on the outside, and they couldn't get into it. Why isn't this sort of conversation becoming more mainstream? It hits ufology, it hits the community, people discuss it. Why doesn't the public at large quite yet seem to latch on to comments like this from senior officials and take them seriously enough? You mentioned earlier, Grant, you said, if and when we get disclosure and they say we've got bodies and we've got craft, the public will go, yeah, we knew that already. Is that it? That people in the back of their minds know this to be true, so it doesn't impact the way it should?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things. Lukatsky, I say, is one of the most important people you got to listen to. And at one point, Lukatsky says, I and possibly Colm are experts at taking highly classified material and moving it down to lower classifications. And that's his whole idea, that it appears that it's part of his job to leak this stuff. Like, how could you possibly leak in a book and be cleared by Dopser to say, yeah, we had a craft and we managed to get in it? And then you remember when he did that interview with Knapp and Corbell, they started asking, well, what's inside the craft? What's it? And he basically said, I can't tell you. You can only have what's in the book, and it has to be exactly how I've written it. And he said, I could maybe get that. I'd have to put it through Dopser and put it in the next book. And then you go like, this guy is basically revealing this stuff, that he's going to tell the next type of story, what's inside the craft. And that's when he said, if you knew what was inside if you knew that, referring to what's inside the craft, then you'd realize that the whole rest of the book is primitive. And this is this whole idea that it's way more complex than people think it is. This idea that it's bigger inside than it is outside. And the other thing that Katsky said that I picked up on, that I don't think even the UFO community. So it's not just the public, because the UFO community is not picking up on this either. He said, I think he said 200,000, and Valet said 260,000 in the database, and whatever it was, like 200,000 sightings. He said, we had these 200,000 sightings. He said, it's really strange. It's like you're driving a car down the freeway or down the street, and every car is different. And I went, holy cow. And he's basically saying like every UFO is different. It's like, it's this sort of morphing. And then I go, that's why that happened. And this is not in the, I'm doing an update to the UFO Sky Pilots books. I go, that's why that. I had a guy who was a U.S. Air Force retired colonel, and he said there was these people behind him, which is part of the thing that's not in the book either. People, somebody behind him telling them what to do. And so I said to him, I said, okay. And then they said, go ahead and do it. And he said, I don't know what to do. And I said, just do it. You know what to do. And he sees his panel board and he goes and puts his hand on his panel board. And he said, suddenly he said, I'm like flying an F-16 jet fighter in Iraq. And when I heard Lakatsky say everyone was different, then I go, that's why Candace said a different thing. So I knew Candace Powers, who's an experiencer out of Boulder. And so I went to Candace. I said, Candace, I remember you said you flew the craft. You remember? And she said, yeah. Yeah. And I said, well, tell me how you flew the craft. She says, well, there was this ball and I had my hand over top of this ball, but I wasn't touching the ball. And as I moved my hand, the craft would move. And I said, there was no panel? She says, no, there's no panel. And the Katsky, and I went through my data of the 36 people, and now it's up to about 50 people who had flown the craft, and nobody touched the same thing. One guy touched the panel on the wall. Chris Bledsoe touched a beehive in the middle of the room. Candace was touching a ball. This guy was touching a panel. Some people are sitting in a chair with their finger on the end of a chair, and nobody touched the same thing. And I go, like, what's the chances? They got 36 people and nobody touched the same thing. It's the craft is alive. You touch the craft, but everybody's doing a different thing. So Lakatsky said a lot of stuff that people should really pay attention to, because it's almost like it's his job to get this stuff out. And it gradually sort of weaves its stuff down. Same as I had a film guy here in Canada who was approached by intelligence to do a film. And that's the thing. What you do is you sort of tell the story, but it's plausible deniability. The story sort of gets out. Nobody has any details. But I believe it's Lakatsky's job to do this. So if his third book comes out, you're going to get this whole thing that even Chris Bledsoe said, 30 feet across on the outside. And when he went inside, it was the size of a football stadium. Lovelace said the same thing. Puthoff admitted this same sort of thing. And then I remember that it occurred to me, the first woman that told me that she had flown the craft, I was going to throw her out of the house. I thought she was insane. And then she said, oh, yeah, they got crafts. They can make them as big as they want. They got crafts that are as big as a solar system. I go, yeah, sure they do. It's like, and now you start to realize that they can make it as big as they want. They can do whatever they want. They can. And I've heard these stories of, people going there and the being just puts his hand out, the book comes out of the wall and stuff like this. This is just so complex. But they just feed the basic parts to the public, and I think that may be what it's about. Like, why would you allow Luella Zondo to say, yeah, we got bodies and crafts? Why would, if you're a Dobster, why would you do that? And I think it's because the story's already out. The same as my story was out about flying the craft. So now some guy can come out and talk about flying the craft. And yet, I'm not saying these people are lying, but I'm saying that the government has more control over what these people are saying or what they're allowed to say than people think. And they're basically unraveling the story. So they're not giving us enough to figure it out, but we're not back in 1947. That's not what they want. They don't want us being totally blindsided by this thing. They just want us to gradually move along. And it's like anything else, spies that saved the world and stuff, and they get to write their story up, but you got to change the names, you got to change the locations and the dates and stuff like that, and you can tell your story, and these stories sort of get out. So there's a process that I would say Lakatsky is one guy to listen to. The other guy you got to listen to definitely is Jim Semivan. Jim Semivan indicated the other thing that would indicate that this thing may be more spiritual than you think it is, because Jim Semivan said, if you remember the interview he was doing with James Ian Dolly, he couldn't talk about his experience with the beings. And then James says to him at the end, he says, oh, so was there any telepathy involved? And then Jim said, yeah, that was the weirdest part. He said, I was standing there and there was this being behind me. I don't know if it was a gray or a reptilian or whatever it was, but it had this guardian type thing going on about it. I went, guardian type thing? And if you studied Dr. Michael Newton, you know the guardian angel, when you leave and you stand in front of the council, your guardian angel stands behind you on the left side. So I said to James, I said, phone him back, ask him if it's on the right side or the left side. Because everybody started talking. And I remember that this is the retired U.S. Air Force colonel. There was somebody standing behind me and they were telling me what to do. And I remember in all my psychedelic experiences, I never saw anybody, but somebody was telling me what to do. It was almost like somebody was behind me. And that's that. So I went to Whitley Strieber and I said, "Hey, Whitley, you run the craft a lot of times." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you ever have anybody standing behind you that was telling you what to do? And you couldn't see them?" And he said, "All the time." He said, "I told that story. I was going to steal the craft. I was sitting at the panel at this board and I was looking at it and I said, boy, I'd love to steal this craft." And he said somebody behind him started laughing. So this is the thing. They're gradually unraveling this thing and telling the basic core story. Like, and what they'll do is they'll give two stories. So like the Holloman Air Force Base story, which has been confirmed basically by Eric Davis, who talked to two presidents about, yeah, this is a real deal that they landed this thing at Holloman, and it ended up in the Close Encounters of the Third Kind movie. When you look at that, you have two different stories. So that's what I think they do. So I had the story. Emmenegger told me definitely it was May of 1971. And then Richard Udy starts telling the story to Linda Howe and other people. That, no, it was 1964 at White Sands and the aliens got lost or something. And so then it comes down to Linda saying 64. I'm saying it's 71. And then everybody goes, yeah, that's just, you can't even get the story right. You guys are all making it up and stuff like that. And Linda and I are fighting about, what's the date? No, it's not this, it's that or whatever. And that's what they do. They throw mud in the water. So you'll put different stories out. And I'm always suspicious of guys that suddenly come out and say, I've got the most highly classified secret and I'm going to tell it. And it's like, why are you not in jail? Why are you talking? Because to me, you can take, there was a woman in Georgia. She had one page of a top secret document that she leaked and she ended up 5 years in jail. This is serious stuff. You can't just take the most highly classified secret in the United States and just suddenly walk out and start talking about it and say, I'm a whistleblower and I want protection or whatever. To me, there has to be something more to the story than this guy just suddenly decided that he was going to violate his national security oath. Because when you get to that level, you have to be really trustworthy to get that kind of clearance. And that these guys would suddenly violate their security clearance to come out and start talking about this stuff. I'm not suspicious. I'm not saying they're lying, but I'm saying the story is a little more complex than people give it credit for.
Yes. So on that, David Grush has
Yeah.
been a major name. And I think I've probably said this to you on past interviews, Grant, and I've said it to many other guests. Being based outside of the United States, being outside of, North America, it takes a lot for a UFO story to break into our news in any way, shape, or form, and it doesn't usually last very long at all. The biggest story of the last maybe 10, 20, 30 years, maybe ever, that's hit the UK news has been David Grush coming forward in July 2023. It hit our broadsheets, it hit the major newspapers. I had some broadsheet journalists get in touch who were actually almost confused that this really serious thing had happened in the United States. And it was all based on Grush and his claims with Fravor and Graves beside him. Grush came out and then seemed to almost take a step back, perhaps due to the whole Ken Klippenstein journalism, trying to shoot him down and the kind of slander against his name. Were you surprised Grush kind of came out in a big way and then disappeared and has now re-emerged and with Eric Burleson and co as part of this task force?
Yeah, he's the main one. I knew about him a year before. We had a meeting. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but we had a meeting with Elizondo and Mellon, and there's 10 MPs in Canada were going to come forward. And I was going to put together a panel with Elizondo, Nolan, Avi Loeb, and Lou Elizondo, and they would answer questions. It'd be like a panel. And these MPs, they were going to come public, didn't know anything about UFOs. So they'd say, what about this? What about that? And these experts would answer it. And that's when I first heard about David. They call him David from Colorado Springs. And the Canadians were saying, can you get another guy like that to talk to us? And he had already talked to the Canadians. Elizondo had put him in contact with the Canadians. And one of the Canadian MPs was talking to Grush. The foreign thing is interesting, which goes to whistleblowers again. Why are there only American whistleblowers? Well, why is this simply U.S.? And that's where we start to consider the fact that maybe the U.S. government has something to do with the fact that there's only U.S. whistleblowers. Why aren't there Chinese whistleblowers or Russian whistleblowers or Canadian whistleblowers that are talking about working on programs and stuff like that? It just seems to be an American phenomena. So Grush being this thing about being a foreigner, again, I got a phone call from a guy was working with Pandolfi. This is many years ago. And that's when he said to me, he says, oh, I'm calling you. This is Kevin Albert was his name. He said, I'm calling you. U.S. intelligence said I should talk to you. And I said, I'm Canadian. You realize I'm a Canadian? And he goes, yeah. I said, U.S. intelligence? Why would U.S. intelligence say talk to me? And he said, and what they wanted this documentary put out about the aviary. This whole idea that's now very popular is the idea that there are these people like Kit Green, Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée, all these guys who have been working together since like the 1970s on this whole thing. And they've got all the key stories. And that if you want to know what's going on in the UFO field, you got to listen. You got to read every journal that Jacques Vallée puts out, because he basically takes a truck and runs everybody over, and he tells all this stuff that he probably shouldn't be telling. And these guys have a lot more knowledge than you and I have. So maybe a year ago, a friend of mine, I'm in Vancouver now, in Vancouver, got contacted again, and they wanted him to do a documentary. And again, and there was going to be an interview with Pandolfi. It sounded like Pandolfi was actually going to go on the record. He was retiring, and he was going to go on the record and answer UFO questions. And this guy was picked up, and I said, well, maybe the reason they pick you up is because in the United States, which is another problem people have to answer, is if you're CIA or whatever, you're not allowed to run counterintelligence against the U.S. people. It's totally illegal. You can't do that. And so it's like when Pandolfi first contacted his friend Dan Smith, and Pandolfi is supposedly the guy who was briefing Trump, and right back to Reagan, he briefed all the presidents. And when Dan Smith first got contact, he said, well, I'm going to Los Alamos. I'm going to talk to the aliens. And Dan Smith said, what? And Dan Smith had a lot of money. He didn't really care about anything. He started posting stuff. And he actually went to the CIA and filed a complaint against Ron Pandolfi, because he's CIA. CIA is a foreign intelligence agency. It's not supposed to be dealing with anybody in the United States. And he basically said, he confirmed this to me in another interview I did with him a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, this is true. I did this. And it was a $100,000 investigation by the Inspector General of the CIA on Ron Pandolfi as to why is Ron Pandolfi talking people in the UFO community. He's not supposed to be. This is not his deal. He's on watch. So if you get someone like Grush, who retires, or Elizondo quits or whatever, that's a different story. If the guy's retired, then you can expect the guy to maybe sort of talk. But as long as you're on duty, because Pandolfi actually offered me one point, this is maybe 6 months ago, I said, well, you're always complaining everybody's loon, crook, and worse, everybody's lying and stuff like that. Why don't you just stand up and tell us everybody what's going on? And he said, okay, send me a list of questions and we'll have a debate. And I said, I don't want to debate with you. I have no interest in debating with you. And number two, you're still working for Trump. And as long as you're working for Trump, I don't believe a damn thing you're saying. But he actually said, send me all the questions and I'll answer the questions. We'll have a debate. And so this is the thing is if you're a Canadian, it's a little bit different. You can play around. You can run counterintelligence against other people, put stuff in there. Whereas if you're in the United States, you can be very careful as to if you're leaking stuff and trying to influence the American people, because it's basically illegal to do.
On this then, you mentioned this idea of political roadblocks. You're saying the intelligence is ultimately in control of this.
Yeah.
What are the mechanisms that the government, the human, and I hate using that term, the government, because the government's a big organization filled with offices, tens of thousands of people who do all kind of jobs. But, so the gatekeepers in charge of this, how are they still keeping this under wraps and still keeping it going under the public radar and keeping that level of interest that may truly blow this open, while at the same time leaking all these different bits of information you're talking about?
Well, I guess it's a hard question to answer, but you have to remember this. They started back in World War II doing this stuff. So when you come up against U.S. intelligence, I always tell people, remember, these guys have like billions and billions and billions of dollars to run programs. They've been doing this for almost a century. They know what they're doing. They know how to run a counterintelligence operation. They know how to manipulate people. And this is where Chase Brandon came under, where Chase Brandon he actually admitted that he was the guy that went to Hollywood. So if you're doing a CIA movie in Hollywood, you say, hey, Andy, I heard you're doing a CIA movie. And you go, and CIA is going to be in it. You go, yep. Have you ever been to the CIA? No, never been to the CIA. Would you like to go to CIA? I'm from the CIA. I can take you and you can take a look around the CIA, and that'll help you get a more accurate view of what you're going to put. And what they're doing is they're trying to spin people. They've done this forever. They know how to manipulate people to make them move down a certain path. And this whole idea of the disinformation is you basically put out a story. So if somebody like Grush comes out with a really high end story or something, then you put out other people who put out a counter story or something against Grush. That you have this, it's not illegal, but it's you throw mud in the water. So that's this idea of two different stories that you tell a different story that's similar, and then you don't know who to believe and stuff like that. But they've been doing it forever, and people say they can't keep secrets. I firmly believe they can't keep secrets, even though the secret is sort of out. But there's more secret behind, and part of the secret may be that they really don't know, that they really have been open. Like Barack Obama said, we have videos, and we don't know what they are. And then where they asked Jimmy Carter, James Fox went and asked Jimmy Carter, if you remember this whole thing about the book signing. Jimmy Carter, he had all these books, and he forced Jimmy Carter to sign all these books. And then he got to ask him a question. He said, "Why didn't you do something when you were in the White House?" Jimmy Carter said basically the same thing. He said, "There are many possibilities, but nobody has answers." And nobody wants to believe this thing, that the government may not really understand this principle. Yeah, or Jim Semivan says, just because you got bodies and crafts doesn't mean you know what you're dealing with. And that's why I say, listen to Jim Semivan. This is a guy that tells the story about the two briefings. He got briefed by Ron Pandolfi, which now seems to be confirmed by Jacques Vallée. And then he got the briefing where he says these guys told him to get us a conference room inside the CIA. And he said these guys came in, and he said they had as many tickets as I had, and they were allowed to walk around unescorted inside the CIA. So these were very powerful people. And he said they walked him into this room with a 6 to 8 hour briefing, and they scared the living daylights and told him exactly what's going on. And he basically says, "Yeah, I know what's going on. I'm not going to tell you what the legacy programs are or whatever." And then when he says, he says, "There does not appear to be any there." I always say to people, okay, so this guy basically knows a lot of what's going on. And I think you got to listen to him. I think he's very truthful. What the hell's he talking about when he says there does not appear to be any there? And this whole idea that we think we got it all figured out. We got this puzzle is all put together. We've got one piece to put back in the puzzle. And I think when you get to the bottom line, it's going to be exactly even Trump. I saw the videos. Yeah, these guys were great pilots, and it was all very interesting. And he leaves it at that they may not have any answers. They may basically have bodies and crafts and stuff that's being donated to them. Not that's I think it's being controlled by the you don't come 10,000 light years across the universe and then start crashing. And you don't have little tiny, as I said, the hell put off. Come on, hell, their little pieces don't fall off the craft. I mean, they're dropping this stuff. What they're doing is they're creating awe and curiosity, and that's what they want to do. Awe and curiosity. Unless you have that, you're not going to do any scientific research. As soon as you got awe and curiosity, you start to research. And the problem that we have is that the government controls all the research money, and that's why we're doing this fear. The aliens are going to eat us nonsense. Because if you go in there, as Leslie Kane did in her book in 2010, and said, we've got to investigate this because it might be a threat to airline traffic, everybody just looks and says, get out of here and don't let the door hit you on the way out. Who cares? But if you say, oh, they're looking at them, they're going to shut our nuclear missiles off, and they're raping people, they're abducting people against their will and stuff like that, you make this whole thing. It's weapons of mass destruction 2.0. What you're trying to do, which they have done, is scare the living daylights out of Congress. And that's not the process I think you should take. But they have no choice, because there's no money in research in UFOs. And now there may not be any money in anything, because the U.S. government is sort of being shut down. So the people who have believed there's going to be disclosure, that Donald Trump is now suddenly going to start a new agency in Washington and hire 10,000 people to study UFOs. It's not going to happen. They're basically shutting the government down. It's deep swamp, and the government's not going to take control of this, which is another problem you have with disclosure. Is when you do the disclosure, I say to people, okay, so as Walker said, as he said to us, he said, okay, so when you discover it, what are you going to do? What are you going to do then? And nobody has an answer to that. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to take the crafts back. We own the crafts. So if you're, this guy from Tennessee, what are you going to do? Take your horses on a wagon and go to Lockheed, pick up a craft and take it back to your barn and start working on it? Or were you going to take it and put it in Congress? And they don't know that the people that have the crafts now are the experts. So if you take the crafts back, then you have to assign them out to somebody else to research them. And it's going to be the same people, because they're the experts. Or you give them all to Elon Musk, and you run this whole deal about giving them to your friends and neighbors and stuff like that. So that's the other problem you have, is that if you take the crafts back, that's not going to solve anything. And the other big problem with disclosure that people will not actually talk about is if they do. So if they say, we want the aliens to land, and to tell us what's going on, I say to people, do you seriously think for 1 second that in the United States of America, as it stands today, that grays, reptilians, and mantids are going to be allowed to walk the streets of America? Are you kidding me? There's no chance. So when I hear these stories about 2026, 2027, open contact, I'm going, give your head a shake. There's, unless something very seriously weird happens between now and then, there's no chance. Or are you going to allow, as I said, like when you're on a ship, there's nothing material on the ship. It's very sparse, so they don't make any money. All these aliens are working for free. So are you going to allow them to open a factory beside Tesla in California and start making cars that can go anywhere with no engines, with no fuel? They can go to Mars for the weekend, and they sell for $1,000 or $2,000. You're going to allow them in the free enterprise system to come in with their advanced technology and start producing stuff? It's not going to happen. There's no way, and that's what the government has to look at. Is if this does happen, that to me is catastrophic disclosure. If they suddenly start walking around, like, what are you going to do? I mean, people are going to be trying to shoot them and stuff like that. Or you even have the stories now that there's aliens in Area 51 that are held in compound. I mean, this is a lot of disclosure problems that people really haven't looked at. And it comes back to what Dr. Eric Walker says. You're just curious. Admit it. You're just curious. You want to know this, you want to know that. And for you and I who run podcasts and stuff, that's great, because you have the podcast and everybody goes, oh, some news stories. And it's like, we got nothing to do tonight. Let's listen to Andy's podcast, and Crazy Grant's on there and he's got to tell some new stories or whatever. And that's what it basically comes down to. And that's fine. But I think there's bigger problems in this whole idea. Or if the aliens come down and say, you all got to unite, you got to all be one. And if you don't, as they did to the Canadians, they said to the Canadians, apparently in 1950, they said, we will never interfere with what's going on in the world unless there's a nuclear exchange. And in that point, we will stop a nuclear exchange. And we could do it. And in order to prove that we could do it, we could take the moon in front of the entire world, split it in half, and put it back together again. Other than that, we will allow the human race to stew in its own juices. So that's, to me, is more of a thing where they're gradually hinting to us what the answer is, and they're creating awe and curiosity to force us to do it. Whereas we say, okay, we're here in Iraq, we're going to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus and McDonald's. And then next thing you know, they're pointing guns, get the hell out of here. And that's the problem we have, is that we're treating it like we do in the Western world, where we're going to take over more stuff. We need more cars, we need more production, stuff like that. And all this is to get more stuff, free energy and entertaining stories. And it's way more complex, especially when you start looking at Walker's question is, okay, once you get disclosure and the beings land or whatever, what are you going to do then?
That might be a good place to mention the forthcoming book. You've got The Big Game, The Supernatural Blueprint. I don't have a copy of this yet, Grant. So this book, tell us, you've sent me over some of the basics, what it's going to look like, the structure of it. This, for me, seems like what you've talked about, that progression for you away from the disclosure process, a governmental disclosure, to talk about what you truly think is the key to this consciousness. People call it the psionics and all that kind of stuff, but it's consciousness, it's the mind. Is that what you think is the key to this whole subject now?
Well, basically, it was going to originally be called crossovers. And it basically comes down to, like, you work on near-death experiences and you work on UFOs. And you will know that there are many similarities. For example, 360-degree vision. People in UFO things will describe, the one guy said, when I put my hand on the panel on the wall, suddenly I can see in 360 degrees. Now, if you're going to make up a story, that's not the kind of story you want to make up. And what you start to see, if you've been in the UFO thing long enough, and especially if you look at the free survey data about how many have had out-of-body experiences, 80% have had out-of-body experiences, like 95% have had paranormal experiences, 37% have had near-death experiences. And you realize there's these crossovers. Or even Alexander seeing aliens when he had his near-death experience and stuff like that. And the one that sort of encouraged me to do this, that I realized, like, this is really weird, is the one you mentioned, the thing about the craft being bigger on the inside. So I have this guy, and I just put the interview up on my YouTube channel, White House UFO. His name is Ron Johnson. I've known him for 20 years. He's a Mormon guy, straight out of the earth type guy. And he told the story one time. He said his being, everybody has a being, which again is kind of weird. It's like I go, when people tell me they're on the craft and there's beings there, I say, hey, so what's the name of the guy you're dealing with? And they all tell me. And then you start thinking, is this a spirit guide or is this an alien? And his guy was called Elby. That he's dealing with a being called Elby. And the under regression, the supposed story was that this was his son, his biological son, half alien, half human. And he said, LB took him to the spirit world 3 times. I said, LB took you to the spirit world? And this is the whole idea that when you get people on board the craft, they start talking about dead people. Or, when Annie Strieber said to Whitley, whatever we're dealing with, after she read all the communion letters, whatever we're dealing with has to do with death. And that's this whole thing. There's these interconnections. So Ron Johnson says, I said, he took you to the spirit world? Yeah. He said the first time it was sort of like a dark place, almost like Eben Alexander describes. And the second time he could hear his mother, he could talk to his mother, but he couldn't see her. The third time he's actually with his mother, and he's in the spirit world with his mother. And then he says, and we're in this field. It was just beautiful. And off in the distance, there was this like a temple. And he mentioned a town in Iowa and Utah where this Mormon temple. He says there's a little Mormon temple there. And so we go to this temple. He said, we got to the temple. We went inside. Grant, he says, you can't believe it. It was like 10 or 100 times the size inside as it was outside. And I go, what? Are you in a UFO or are you in the spirit world inside a Mormon temple? And you go, it's like, that is just like a weird crossover. It's like exactly like someone in a UFO experience saying, holy cow, the craft was the size of a football stadium inside and it was small outside. And then he's talking about his mother says, well, you're going to get a room in here when you die and this sort of stuff. And they go down to the end of the hall of this big giant building. And there's these crystals coming out of this table. And I said, crystals coming out of the table? And he said, yeah, these crystals. And he said, you look at them at a certain angle and you can see your past life. And he said, my dog disappeared in 1972. And he said, so I wanted to see what happened to my dog. So he looked at his dog's crystal at a certain angle and you can see his dog's life. And at the very end, his neighbor shot the dog, threw it in the back of a pickup, took it to the dump and threw it in the dump. And he said, so now I know what happened to my dog. And I go, crystals? And I said, what about yours? He said, no, my mother said my crystal wouldn't appear till I died. And if you go to the crossover with the UFO community, if you take a look, you see in the UFO Cover Up Live 1980 documentary where they introduced the Condor and the Falcon and the live alien idea and stuff like that. They put that in. That was the end of the Reagan administration. I believe Reagan wanted that stuff leaked in there. So they told the story that there was a live alien and stuff like that. And the guy who was playing the Falcon was Richard Doty, who was playing the Falcon. And he said, the most amazing thing I saw, and I asked Doty about this a couple of times. I said, is this real? He said, the most amazing thing I saw at the time, and Bill Moore was chasing this. Bill Moore and Chandra were chasing this story as well, is the story of the crystal. That the aliens had this crystal and they held it up and they showed the U.S. government the crucifixion of Jesus on this crystal. You could see all the past and future and this sort of stuff in this crystal. And then if you study Dr. Michael Newton, Life Between Life, there's 7,000 people that he takes into the past life and he lets them die and takes them into the spirit world. And they all describe the same sort of thing in the spirit world. They talk about, you go to these big libraries and you're in the library and you open the book up and there's this crystal inside the book. And you look at this crystal and you can see your past and your future lives and stuff. And you plan your future life looking in this crystal as to what happened in the past and stuff like that. So you see these crossovers. It's in the Newton stuff. It's in the UFO stuff. It's in the spirit world. And dead people on board the ship, and people are psychic, and all this kind of stuff. And you realize like this is all probably the same thing. It's just a different sort of thing. And we've solved none of it. It all started back in 1848 or whatever with the Fox sisters with the rapping, and we have not uncovered any paranormal stuff, whether it's explanation from mediumship or UFOs or anything. It's all this paranormal, which indicates there's an aspect to reality that we don't fully understand yet. And once we understand that, then all this stuff's going to make sense. And the aliens are no different than us. They're etheric beings the same as us. The basic mystical teaching is remember who you actually are. You are not Andy playing a puppet on a stage. As Jack Sarfati said, you go on the stage, read your damn lines and leave. It's like you're coming on here and we're playing these roles to do certain things and learn certain things. And we go off the stage again. And this is how it's actually working. Whereas we bought into the idea that this is our 80 years. We got to get as much stuff as we can to this 80 years because it may be the only time we're ever here. And that, there's no life after death. But I'm sure through studying people who have near-death experience stuff that there's a lot of crossovers. The trauma thing where you have 10% of people have bad abduction experiences and 10% have bad experiences with near-death experience. And people say, well, these aliens, look what these people had horrible experiences. And I say, well, in a near-death experience, you have 10% of people have horrible experiences. And so what's God, some kind of idiot that puts you through this horrible experience? Is he that bad a guy? And you start to realize it may be part of you, because I had in my psychedelic thing, I had 5 experiences in these 27 that were just horrific to start. And it was the old idea where I said, okay, I planned this. I can't blame anybody for this. This is the way it's going to be. I'm going to live in this hell environment for the rest of eternity. And as soon as I did that, boom, it was gone. I was out of it and into the light and stuff like that. And this whole idea of surrender, this idea that you are part of the experience that you're. So don't blame Hillary Clinton. The dog ate the homework. My mother-in-law, whatever. We are, as Seth said, if you go back to the original Chandler, that was the famous Seth. You manifest everything around you. There is no other rule. Or if you go to quantum physics, John Alexander, it's a participatory world. We are part of it. We are actually, in my impression, we are actually creating it. If everything is consciousness is primary, then everything is made out of consciousness. And as Michael Newton describes in his books, we're making it. We're making the world. We're creating the world. God does not create the heaven and earth and stick a soul into it, spiritual stuff into it. We're creating it. We're all part of God. We're all part of this field. It's a field. We're a part of the field, and we're creating the world through our consciousness, through intention and stuff like that. And that's the kind of stuff that there's no way you can go to the public. You got in the United States, you got 43% of people in the United States read at a grade 5 level. You have 21% of people in the United States who are functionally illiterate. You take those kind of concepts to them. You can't do it. There's absolutely no way. It's way beyond them. That's why I think this gradual disclosure thing is coming out that Rand pointed out in the early 1960s. Unless you gradually leak this thing out, you're going to disappear. You have to get this thing out, and that's what I believe they're doing.
Is it the case then that you have the UFO thing, let's call it lazily, and
Yeah.
it's easier to control the narrative and how that comes out, because then that allows you to shape what comes next far easier, because you don't want them to get to the real conversation, the real secret of consciousness, manifestation, what is reality. Do you know what? We can slowly bleed out this other thing and make it look like the big deal when really it's not. And that's the key to the control of everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. That's even Walker said that to us. He said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And then the guy was actually from Great Britain that was interviewing him said, well, no, I didn't really know. And he said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. And he called the control group a set of elite. He said, if you were a part of that group, I would know. And he said, unless you have the mind of Einstein or likewise, you will not get very far with this. And remember, that's 1990, where he's saying this thing is very, very complex. And we always want to get it down to being a very simple thing. So that's where I think the government may be stalling for more time, but they want that idea out, that idea of the consciousness. That's why I say the Tom DeLonge story was much more important than people give it credit for. Because people say, oh no, Tom DeLonge was making it. And I said, no way. These guys were operational. That's the key. Are you retired or are you operational? The guys he dealt with, McCaslin, Robert Weiss at Lockheed Skunk Works, and the other general, Kerry, all these guys were operational and they were helping him. They were putting this stuff out. And that's what Tom DeLonge, that was his pitch. He said, you guys can't get it out. The young people aren't listening to you. I can get out the story. And then the one guy said, hey, maybe this will work. And that's when they started to help him. And Semi Van says, oh, they didn't give me any classified material. But well, what does that mean? They gave him material that sort of started to leak the story out. And he tells the very important story that people, even the UFO people, don't really deal with. And that is when he was in the Lockheed skiff. He's in there, and Weiss hasn't come into the room yet. I think he said the head scientist and this other guy, and I believe it was this James Riley guy that offered the craft to Bigelow. And they're in there, and then the guy says to him, okay, I just want to know, how does it work? How did it get here? I just want to know, how does propulsion systems work? And then he'd been hanging around with Stephen Greer at the time. So he said, oh, I think consciousness is involved. And he said, the guy said, now you're talking. And all the guy wanted to talk about for 45 minutes was consciousness. And if you go and you look at James Riley's, the vice president Lockheed, if you take a look at the lectures this guy gave, he gave 2 1-hour lectures that are on the internet. You're going like, holy cow, it's like a new age lecture. He's talking about, no time and space and quantum physics and paranormal stuff. It was just like wild. And it just, so that's the whole thing. They understand parts of it. But they understand the principle of consciousness. So you and I have this discussion, we talk about it, and now, even now, they're flying the craft. I mean, that when I saw it in 2013, Andy, I thought I was seriously going to throw the woman out. I thought she was absolutely insane. So we've gone from 2013 till now. You even go now publicly and you say, "Oh, you're flying the craft," because Barber and these guys came forward and got this national attention all over the place. Now everybody goes, yeah, I know they fly the craft. I mean, I know you use your mind. There's no way that was believed in 2013. So what happens is you and I have a discussion. We have another podcast, more podcasts. These guys come out. The consciousness rises, and this the old idea. They don't care. They don't care what they say about you. Just make sure they spell your name right. The Hollywood idea. And that as we go, consciousness rises, and it comes to where I say to people, hey, when was it okay for gay marriage? And they go, I don't know, what, 10, 15 years ago? Nobody remembers it. It'll just suddenly happen as it did with UFOs. I've written articles forever about the fact the government would never, ever admit they're doing UFOs. And suddenly in 2017, in the morning, Lou Elizondo resigns. In the afternoon, the New York Times is sitting in a room with him. And Bigelow, I think, was there, and I think Putoff was there, and they're making this plan for releasing this stuff. And Semivan, who says this is terrible, they didn't ask my permission. I said it was the biggest sighting that ever happened in UFO history. If he had not had this encounter with the beings, nothing would have happened, because it was Jim Semivan who was behind the 2017 disclosure. He was the main guy. He was the guy who was pushing this whole thing. He went to the head of the 3-letter agency, said, you guys can't get it out. We're going to get it out. We're not going to release classified material. We're going to drop this thing. And if he had not had the experience, so people say, oh, it's terrible. The aliens abducting people are doing whatever. He's scared to live in daylights out of Semivan. But they forced disclosure, because Jim Semivan went public. He never would have gone public if he hadn't had that experience. So you see consciousness rising, and then it just suddenly flips. So now everybody knows, okay, yeah, they got bodies and crafts. Yeah, UFOs exist. Yeah, they fly it with their mind. And that's how it's working, is he rises up, and nobody confirms it, but it just becomes a general thing in the zeitgeist where everybody's suddenly believes this phenomena as to the potential. And I don't know what they're going to leak next, but to me, I'm always amazed when I hear these guys that went to Dopser and they allowed them to talk about bodies and crafts, and they allowed them to talk about psionics and stuff like that. And they go, really? I mean, if it was I was in there, I would say, no, you don't talk about this kind of stuff. But maybe because my book was out or people were talking about it, they said, okay, now the time's right, you can talk about it. And now I think most people would admit that, yeah, there's a consciousness aspect to this thing. And in 2012, it was deadly to talk about consciousness. It was deadly even in academia to talk about consciousness. Now it's a cool thing. Everybody's talking about consciousness, and that's how this thing is sort of unraveling. And I think the people behind it actually know that. They've got enough psychologists that are working on the problem, that they know how to unravel this thing. And they've done this whole thing as James Lukatsky said, I'm an expert at taking highly classified material and moving it down to lower classifications. He basically said that's his job. That's what he's doing. And he's writing a third book, and he may talk about what's inside the craft. And I was even shocked. Even they were shocked. We had a craft. You're admitting we have a craft. And he said, you take what's in the book. Don't add anything. That's what was approved. So what he said about that craft in the meeting with Reed inside a facility, which means that at least Reed was briefed on UFOs. So the idea is, oh, they're not briefing anybody. No, that's not true. That's what Jim Semivan said. Yes, this is legal, and it's run out of a PED. It's run out of a Presidential Executive Emergency Action Document, which is the same thing as the presidential security, or what happens if there's a nuclear attack and stuff like that. And that's the kind of stuff where they can seal it off from anybody. And that's why I believe that this is like a FEMA problem, that it was written up as a potential, what happens if the aliens invade the world? You've got to have a plan. So they got this plan, and this is part of the plan. And that's why when Paul Hellyer in Canada told the story, I was sitting beside him when he told the story. He was asked by a reporter, who in the Canadian government knows what's going on? Who's the dark guys? And he said, well, I don't know, head of the Privy Council, he's guessing away. And then they came around for another round of questions, and Paul said, hey, I know somebody who's actually briefed. And he tells this story about this, get a call from this Air Force guy. And he said the head of emergency management is dying of ALS. He's got Lou Gehrig's disease. He's got something he wants to get off his chest, and he wants to talk to you. So that's like the head of FEMA in Canada. And he said, so Paul didn't phone him. And then the guy phoned back, and he says, You better phone him. He's about to go off the cliff. You better talk to him. And he phoned him, and the guy said, I got to get this off my chest. I just want you to know this is real. I went to Langley. I signed my life away. They told me exactly what was going on. It's real. And I was at Area 51, and I actually sat inside a craft. I just want to that's all I'm telling you. I want you to know this is real. So that's emergency management. So you got to have a plan. People say, well, no, they're not interested. Well, of course, you got to have a potential. I mean, if you're in fear of this and this enemy and that enemy and all, everybody's against us and we're getting picked on. I mean, sure, you pick up aliens. Sure, what happens if we get an alien invasion? They have to have a plan for an alien invasion, and that's what this is about. That's why it's so highly secret, that it's hidden away in this PEAD authorization from the president, which means the president is running the show. People say the president doesn't have a security clearance. Baloney. The president's run the show. He's got to have at least a basic effort, unless he doesn't want to know about it. But I think we're going to get disclosure, but it's going to come. It's coming faster than I ever thought it would come. That's for sure. I mean, I never would have believed the New York Times article. The guy that would talk about psionics. A lot of the people that have come forward, all the stuff David Grush came forward and was allowed to talk about, that just shocked me. They have to be giving him approval to talk about this kind of stuff. He can't just walk out there. And so you can see that somebody's behind him, especially when someone like Lou Elizondo or even Grush says, I can't talk about that unless I'm in a skiff. I can't talk about that. I got to protect my security clearance, which means someone's watching them. They know more than what they're saying. And if you get me in a skiff, then I will tell you the rest of the story. So, yeah, I think we're gradually moving, not gradually, I think we're moving quite quickly towards whatever's going to happen. But again, it comes down to what happens when it actually happens. Are you going to allow these aliens to walk around the streets? Are you going to allow them into a capitalist system where they are allowed to produce stuff at 1/100th the price that we're charging? That's the kind of problems I really think you have, that they must be looking at the background of how do we deal with that kind of stuff.
Let's dive into some listener questions, Grant, because they dive all over different things we've brought up here, and really interesting so far. So thank you to everyone who sent over stuff. Nick says, what does Grant see as the final ends of the NHI? Are there multiple factions? Would he categorize them as good? Does he believe they're steering us towards enlightenment, or are there any elements with malevolent intention? So the kind of end game of the NHI or phenomenon.
I don't believe the alien thing. No, I think that again, this thing that if 40% of people say they knew the answer to everything in the universe and they're on board a ship, the aliens know the answer to everything. It's the idea that everything is in a field, and it's the ability to shut down left brain, get in the field, and we're stuck out of the field. We can't tap in, except in this new book I'm going to do stuff on indentions, 51 Nobel Prizes that came in, inspirations in dreams and stuff like that. You can pop in. But the evil alien thing, no, I think that they understand that they come in. Even I don't know if you've interviewed him. His name is Yossi Ronan. He wrote a book called One, which is the ultimate message, that everything is one. Ronald Reagan's message, how the world would unite if faced with a threat from an alien race. We'd all come together as one. We'd realize we're all one. We're all just God's children. That's the basic message. So I believe the aliens have that. They're doing certain things that are changing, and the whole phenomenon is changing. So it's not like one type of, we've got now into grays. Reptilians didn't appear till the 1980s. If you go back to 1896, you had guys with beards hanging off of ropes off of wooden ships that claimed that they had flown through the vacuum of time and space from Mars. I mean, you got to realize the aliens are changing as we go along. And it went to the contactees of the 1950s. Then the Greys appear in 1961 with Nancy Tremaine, the first case. And then you get now it's all orbs. And the triangle started, I think Bashar claimed 73. He had 2 triangle sightings. I had a triangle sighting in 75. Then the triangles took off, and there's triangles all over the place. Now it's orbs. People got to realize this is a phenomenon that's morphing. And if it's all one thing, they all understand how this thing's put together. And I don't believe that. I think we are on this planet, kidnapped on this planet, and not allowed off because of one thing. We don't understand the principle of oneness. Once we understand the principle of oneness, then you get these things where the CIA, this idea where you have the portals where you can move from one place to another, that they can time travel, or the famous video that I got that made Ron Pandolfi, the presidential briefer, so upset, where his wife asked him, so what do you say, footman? That was his sort of a code word they used from foot. What do you say, footman? And he said, people have always wondered what it's like to go into the next world. there's been a breakthrough. The next time John, he's referring to this guy sitting beside him, John Sillison. Next time John goes to the desert, a number of us here will go into the next world and come back again, which tends to indicate that this is knowledge that they have, and the question comes down to, I don't believe there are. Everybody's playing a role, so you may play the role of the gray next time. You may play the role of a refugee next time. That everybody's playing a role, and that these beings are doing the same thing. They're coming in, they're coming out, and they're coming to do something. So if you believe in reincarnation, which I think a lot more people in the West now believe, then you realize that you're coming in probably for a reason, that you're doing this sort of stuff. And then you start looking at the UFO thing, and you start to see that there are reasons behind this, like the abduction phenomenon. So the story I can tell is Mike Clellan tells the story, and he's famous for the owl books. So Mike Clellan tells the story. He's all frustrated. He doesn't know what's going on. He's seeing these grays. Doesn't want to believe he's abductee and stuff like that. And then he's camping off the interstate in Utah, and he says suddenly wakes up and he sees this UFO with lights around it up on top of the hill. And he goes, "Oh, that's a great UFO on top of the hill." And then he sort of goes back to sleep again. And next thing, he's out of his body, which is the whole thing. He's out of his body. He's floating out of his body. It's his out of body experience. He's over top of the craft. He said, next thing, he's in the craft. And then he's going down this hall with these two grays beside him. And then there's this story that he doesn't really remember exactly how it happened, but there's a gray suit hanging on a wall on a hook. And he goes by, and suddenly, boom, he's in this gray thing. And he looks at himself. He says, "Oh my God, am I gray?" So now he's not, the evil. He's a evil gray guy. Whereas before he was a human being, and he's looking at his hands. He looks at these beings beside him, and he's the same height as these beings. And he's going, "This is really weird. I'm a gray." And he goes into this room, and these beings are behind this table, and it's like a wooden table with a dirty carpet or whatever. It's like like out of a hotel room in Indiana. And he's looking at these beings. They can't see their faces, which you see again with Michael Newton with the faces. You can't the beings that are given life review. You can see them, but you can't see the faces. And he says, they say, "Okay, it's time for you to get going." And he goes, "Get going? What do you mean get going? What are you talking about? What am I here? What do you got me here for?" And he said, "It's time. It's time." And he says, "Time for what?" And then they sort of unblock his mind, and he suddenly remembers. He goes, "What? You never told me it was going to be like this. You never told me it was going to be this frustrating. You never told me it was going to be this depressing. You never told me." He starts swearing at them. He's all angry, like, "You never told me this." And they said, "No, the time's right. Time you got to get going. You volunteered for this." He said, "I volunteered for this." And he's really upset. He said, "No, you volunteered. Time to get going." 2 days later, he gets out of there. He starts writing the owl book, and that's where this thing where it may look like an abduction, but there's something going on in the background that people are being triggered. So Mike Clellan asked the same question I ask people. Mike Clellan says to them, on a scale of 1 to 10, do you believe you're on a mission? And he says, most people say 11. So I ask people the same thing. Do you believe you're on a mission? And they'll say, "I think so. I don't know what it is, but I think I'm on a mission." Or they'll spend an hour telling you what their mission is. And that's the whole thing. Is it's much more complex than people think it is. But evil aliens, I think once you get past the idea of understanding the oneness and how the universe actually works, you understand everything is experience. Even the bad thing is experience. That like Jim Semivan, it was a very bad experience for him. Is he got injured, his wife got injured, but we would have no disclosure today if it had been not for Jim Semivan. So I say this is the most important abduction, this most important sighting that's ever taken place is Jim Semivan getting taken, because he is the guy that opened up the disclosure in 2017 and set up the New York Times story and went with Elizondo and told the government, "We're dropping this thing." And so that's maybe an answer to that question.
Yeah, you mentioned like a morphology. There's a changing and evolution of this phenomenon as the decades have gone on. So these two questions, I'm going to ask you two questions, are very similar, just to give them both the credit for it. So Ross said, "I love listening to Grant. Can you please ask him about how the phenomenon changes by the decade? I've heard him riff on this before. It seems like saucers are out of style of late." And similarly, Rob asked, "Does Grant think the good old saucer shape is now out of fashion? And things like the Tic Tac, the egg, and the android jellyfish are how they want to be perceived now, or are these new phenomena entirely?"
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Is they change from one thing to another, and a lot of it is like, for example, you get the balls inside the cubes that are flying and they go close. And to me, that's basically the theory of wow. Is they say I bet you I can get closer to the jet than you can. It's because, that's what they're doing. So even in the 50s, during the contactee period, they were talking about, in Canada, they're talking about 500 bells. Now you wouldn't even know what bells were, but bells were the Adamski crafts with the balls underneath them. They called them bells. 500 bells would appear over Ottawa, and there would be like this disclosure event. Of course, it never happens. And the people got to remember, the phenomena is not the same way it was today as it was when I started. And because I've been in it so long, 50 years, that I know that things are morphing. And you go back, like people say, it's extraterrestrial. I guarantee it's extraterrestrial. I say, seriously? Do you really think, you go back to 1896 when these guys were told that these guys were Martians? Do you seriously think that these wooden ships in 1896, and 1896 was the year we discovered radioactivity, that they flew through the vacuum of time and space on a wooden ship with propellers and balloons and lights hanging down off this thing? Do you seriously believe they were extraterrestrials? Well, no. And that people that start to realize the principle is that it morphs as it goes along. So it comes to the Foo Fighters, and the Foo Fighters only lasted for just over a year in World War II. They're doing the same thing they're doing now. They're going right near the plane, sitting on the edges of the wings, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get people to say, what the hell's going on? The world can't work this way. This is bizarre. And they're trying to tell you it's not the world you think it is. It's much more bizarre. Think about it. And they keep forcing people to think about it. And then you get Adamski came days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb, days after that. And I won't get into nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons is in almost every major story. Travis Walton being the prime one, 1975, same year I started. Every night that Travis Walton was gone, there was a nuclear missile or a nuclear storage area in the United States that had a UFO over it every single night. So you see these connections, and so you have the guys in ties and suits and stuff like that, and the just before that you had the beings in the 50s that were described with bubble helmets, because that was science fiction. That was like astronauts with bubble helmets, and one even had a corduroy pants, and or the UFO lands, and he says to the guy, I need water. Can you get me water? He gives him a pail, like he came 10,000 years and he's a pail of water, and they're just doing this display thing, and then the abduction thing starts. Then the triangles in 1975, and Betty and Barney Hill had the windows with the little aliens looking out the windows. There are no aliens looking out windows anymore. There are no windows in crafts anymore. Now it's these orb type objects, and everyone's different. Like the triangles, for sure. The triangles are all different. There's triangles, yeah, but when you start comparing the triangles, they're all different. Same as I took all the grays. People say, oh, there's grays. So I took Betty Hill's gray, I put it on a screen, put Whitley Strieber's gray right beside it, and say, those look the same? They're not even close. Put Betty Andreasen's gray, put Ron Johnson's gray, put all these grays, and you start looking, and they're all different. And that's I think what's unique in the universe is that everything is unique. All the leaves on a tree are different. All snowflakes are different. All human beings are different. And uniqueness is not pattern. So when we're running around trying to find pattern in UFOs, that's what Lukatsky said. Every UFO is different. They're basically different. So you're wasting your time trying to find patterns of red ones, green ones, big ones, slow ones. Now we've got the egg ones and stuff like that. And we sort of think that if we can figure out that, yeah, there are egg things, that doesn't tell you anything. Yeah, okay, there's egg UFOs flying around or whatever. And I think that's why they changed this sort of stuff. And even the stuff over New Jersey. They were putting nuclear weapons at the time that the New Jersey thing happened at Farns. What's the one in Britain where they had the UFOs? But they had built a nuclear weapons thing there, and they were putting nuclear weapons in there as the New Jersey thing happened. And that's what they're doing. They're doing these great displays of orbs all over the place, 100 where people are saying, oh, can they have that many foreign drones and stuff like that? They're doing this weird display, and now everything's orbs. There's no more angel hair. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, people now wouldn't even want angel hair. It was all over the place. The Canadians actually had some sent to them by the U.S. military to analyze. And windows and crafts, landings. You remember Stanton Freeman used to say, we got all sorts of physical evidence. We got 4,000 trace cases. I wrote Ted Phillips, who was in charge of the trace cases back in 2000 already. I said, Ted, am I mistaking? Am I making up stuff? Or is the trace, all the landings stopped? He said, yeah, they're basically stopped. He said, we haven't had one yet this year. He said, maybe 1 or 2 a year. And that was back in 2000. They don't land and burn out the crops and leave little footprints like they did at Rendlesham Forest. They don't do that anymore. And that's where you see the phenomena is morphing. It's changing. And it's almost like we're watching the pages of a book change as this phenomena does it. But it's all on the basic thing is they throw something and they change it, they make it more complex, more elaborate, and what all they're trying to do is force people to realize the world is a little bit different than what you think. If there's 100 drones bombarding a nuclear aircraft carrier, then this is something that tells you you better take a look at your science. And the military takes it seriously because they believe that they can get some technology and weapon technology out of this, and maybe they've gotten a little bit, but the phenomena is there, and it's the dropping material, it's dropping matter, crafts. Tim Taylor says that. Bigelow says that. They're all saying, yeah, these are gifted. These things are actually not crashing because whatever they're actually crashing on purpose. And then the one that I heard that floored me was Eric Walker. It says, how do you know they didn't get up and walk away? And I remember at the last Soul conference, someone told me they were sitting beside a very prominent person, and they were talking. I think it was for James Fox was talking about the crash in Arizona, and I think in '52, and that the beings or whatever. And this very high level person was sitting beside someone I knew, and they said, "No, no, no, that's not true. They walked away." And he said that. And my friend said, "Yeah, he said that." Holy cow, Walker was right. They did walk away. So this is the whole deal that yeah, it's morphing, no doubt. And the longer you're in it, the more you look, the more you realize that it just keeps changing and in shapes that shouldn't fly. I mean, boxes and stuff like that, or they're upside down or stuff like that. You realize that they can morph. And I saw two of them. The first one, no, the second night I saw it, it came at me, and it was the first night it was like a red plasma type object. The second night we were sitting there looking there, and these kids are in the field, and it was a big flash on the sky. And the kid said, "Is that it? Is that it?" And I said, "I don't know. I guess that's it." And it went flash, flash. It was jumping around the sky, flash, flash, flash. And this girl was crying; she couldn't see it, and it was all over the place. And as it got closer, it turned into the object I'd seen the first night, this red plasma object. And then when I saw the triangle, just before it was a triangle, it was on the American border, and it was an arc welding light. It came around and it turned into this triangle. So even in the same case, I've had two that I saw personally that started as one object and morphed and changed into another object as it came close to me.
Terence says, question for Grant and yourself. How could consciousness be around before humans ever existed? And do you think we don't really understand time or space generally?
Okay, so consciousness is primary. That's the idea. Where's the observer if humans? Well, again, you got to remember who you actually are. You are not a human being. You are an etheric being. You are a part of a field, almost like an electron. Now, the idea is the electron is not a physical object. It's a manifestation. It's a inside the field. It's sort of like a field inside the field, like a wave on an ocean, and that you're just measuring the difference in that part of the wave as to measuring it. And we're the same thing. The basic line of all metaphysical literature is remember who you actually are. You're this etheric being. So we all started at whatever is the Big Bang or whatever. Even the Big Bang doesn't make any sense anymore because it's like, oh, throw out all this matter. Well, there's no matter. We now sort of know if you break it all down, it's the fields. It's field theory now. And so that would break it down. And the idea is that we are all part. The aliens are all saying this, and a lot of out-of-body experience, near-death experience people are talking about this kind of stuff, where we are part of the one. There's a giant field, which would be God, the source, whatever you want to call it, and the Atman equals the Brahman. It's been known for thousands of years. The small part is part of the big part, or as Bashar says, the one is the all are the one. So we are all parts of this field of God, and we are creating the universe. And if you take a look at Mark Sims, was on this, he's a millionaire guy who was at a Stephen Greer event and then ended up dealing with this being by the name of Tejbar for 13 days. Tejbar gives him a plan of how the universe is unfolded. Exactly the same thing. Michael Newton talks about this, the same thing where he starts as small things and people are creating stuff with energy, with consciousness, and we're creating the universe. And the whole idea that when you get to the very advanced souls, they are creating actual galaxies and stuff like that. That is just making the world more magnificent, grander, and everybody's building stuff. And I remember Michael Newton, and that's 7,000 people that he regressed. And he's talking to the people that are building stuff. And I remember he talked to one guy and he said, "What are you building?" The guy says, I'm making a rock. The guy said, Newton says, A rock? You're making a rock? He said, well, I can't do plants yet. I can't do animals yet. I'm working on this. And it's this idea that we create this stuff, that we're making the mistake of believing it's a physical universe. And when you have aliens walking through walls and going from one point in space to another, you start to realize it may not be a physical universe the way you do, where you think it is. And you even have now the post-materialist world, where a lot of scientists have signed on to this thing, that consciousness is primary. And people forget that the quantum physicists who started the whole quantum physics thing, they all believed consciousness was primary. And then you got to this whole thing about whether it was there's one scientist, Richard Feynman, who said, shut up and calculate. Don't look at the implications of quantum physics, because the implications of quantum physics were what Max Planck, who invented quantum physics, said. That consciousness is primary. Nothing gets behind consciousness. So at the very beginning, we are eternal. We've always been there. We've been part of the thing. And we started out and we've always been the observer. There is nothing before us, and we're part, and we come out. So God did not create the heaven and the earth. God created the sparks of the divine, the fields or whatever, and they created the heaven and the earth. That's why we're responsible. As Seth says, you manifest everything around you. There is no other rule. We're creating this stuff. We're manifesting the world as we have it, and with good ideas and bad ideas, and it's manifesting, it's moving along, and there's really no meaning to it. It's not like everybody's going to go to heaven and hell. This is just a thing where people are building stuff, and it's a world where we've always been the observer. You got to get away from the idea that we're human beings and realize that we're these etheric beings, almost like aliens, where they're balls of light. Suddenly it turns into an alien. And this Yossi Ronan, this Israeli experiencer, said when they came to him, they were like grays, but they were green. And he said they told him, when we come into your world, we take on a body. We have to take on a body in order to work in your world. You can do the same thing. You just don't know it. Or Sherry Wilde, who wrote the book, The Forgotten Promise, where they said, Sherry, have you forgotten the promise that you made? You said you were going to write this book. You were going to come into the world and do this sort of stuff. She said, I'm not writing your damn book. And they talked her into writing the book. And then and when she took it to the publisher said, oh, you said you're dealing with a gray. Yeah, Da's a Zeta. And he said, okay, well, he can't be a Zeta. He says he's from Andromeda. Yeah, that's what he says. He's from Andromeda. Well, if he's from Andromeda, the publisher says he can't be from Zeta. He's a Zeta Reticuli. And I said, well, I'm going to ask him. So next time he comes, he says, okay, Da, so what the hell's going on? Were you an alien, or are you from Zeta Reticuli? What are you doing? And he said, no, that would not best describe who I actually am. I'm an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. And we all are etheric beings. And then she says, well, why do you come as this gray looking thing, this ugly looking gray thing? He said, well, you think we look ugly? He says, well, yeah, you scared the living daylights out of me. And every time you come. And he says, well, it's more practical than a human body. It's easier to do. And then he said, Sherry, have you ever looked in the mirror? And she says, what do you mean? When you look in the mirror with those big teeth you got, we think you're going to eat us. You think we're ugly. And this is this whole idea. We're etheric beings. We are there at the beginning, and we'll be there at the end, and there is no beginning and end. So the observer thing, people confuse it with the observer of a human being, but that's 4,000 years ago. But we were around long before. We may have been on other planets before we came here, before this planet actually had life, because that's what Michael Newton shows, is that you go from one life to this life to a different planet to different experiences, and you're an etheric being taking on whatever you might want to be, a plant or a tree for a while, or that's what it's all about.
Couple of questions to finish off with, Grant. I appreciate you've spent a lot of time with us. Different part of the elephant, great name, says, considering the economic and political goings on of the day, I wonder what he's referring to. If any type of formal disclosure were to happen, could we trust it as anything more than just a distraction?
Yeah. Well, yes, you wonder with the modern day, where it's like news is moving so fast. It's not like before, where it's like 24/7 news, where you can have a scandal and it's gone the very next day. There's another scandal that takes its place. So that's kind of the problem that we're up against. Even you see the thing where the Sonics thing came out. I mean, it was a big story, but it would, like even when the 2017 thing came out, I had written the article in 2009 saying this would never happen. And I was using some of the stuff that Stephen Greer was putting out. People are putting out, like, the Christians are all going to jump off the bridges and commit suicide, and the stock market's going to melt down to zero because oil is going to be worth nothing. And what happened in 2017? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. Nobody jumped off a bridge. The oil didn't melt down. Stock market stayed the same. And that's the way we are right now. I don't think there's a story. That's why people say catastrophic disclosure. And I say, what could be catastrophic disclosure that everybody's going to flip out? I don't think there's anything they could tell you that would flip out. People wouldn't understand. Even when I talk about this kind of stuff, like this idea about the observer effect and the fact that you've always been around and that you're manifesting the universe, that kind of stuff. I mean, people will, you talk to people, their eyes roll back because they just don't understand it. They don't care. And we forget that in the UFO community that we're 1% of the population or 1/10 of 1%. And everybody else doesn't care. They got other things to worry about. It's sort of like, if somebody tells you a story that they discovered some new plant or whatever, it's not like I'm going to quit my job because it's so interesting. I'm going to go study that plant. Everybody's got their things that they're doing that they're interested in. And we have our role of telling this story and being a part of this. But I don't think there's anything that can be disclosed that's going to really flip people out. People just don't understand. They don't read, which is, maybe one of the reasons I'm kind of depressed about the whole thing, because you put out books and nobody really reads them because it's on the internet now. The fact is that on people's attention span now, a child of 1 to 2 years old, their attention span is 4 to 5 minutes. If you look it up on the internet, attention span of somebody on the internet is 8 seconds. So it's like the Twitter thing where it's like they read the first line of what you're saying, they flip to the next thing, flip to the next thing, flip to the next thing. And so we're in a world where it's moving so fast and there's so much big news, scandals, stuff that you've never seen before that I don't think that anything's going to change. I think it's basically what they're doing is they're creating more and more bigger flaps of orbs, bigger displays, and they're doing it over the military because that gets big attention. And the more we talk about it, the more it gets out there, the more the consciousness rises to the point that it doesn't matter what they say, everybody's going to sort of believe it. And that's what Max Planck says. You do not convince your opponent that he's wrong by showing him evidence. Science advances when your opponent dies. One funeral at a time. The next generation is not offended with the idea. So we're trying to convince the people now, and the new generation will come along and they will not see this as offensive. And that's basically what's happening. It's a basic consciousness rising by them. And the idea that we know how to land the plane. That's what they told me. We know how to land the plane, which indicated to me they may have done this on 1,000 different planets. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly how to unravel this thing, how to raise consciousness to get people to realize it's not a physical world. It's a world of consciousness, and it's a completely different world. We're stuck in this Newtonian world of measurement and material and stuff, and they're trying to tell us, no, it's not. And when you realize how the world actually works, then as Ron Pandolfi says, we can go in the next world and come back again.
Rod asks, Grant has been studying UFOs for 50 years. He's seen a lot come and go. I'm curious, in comparison to the last 50 years, does Grant see today as an exciting time or just a lot of hype that will pass with no changes?
No, it's an exciting time because it's a 24/7 news. Like you can go and entertain yourself 15 hours a day looking at new UFO stuff that people are posting. There's a lot of podcasts out there. Yeah, and it's just moving. You got to remember back in the 70s, there was actually the disclosure stuff back in the 70s. It's in one of my books. I think it may be the UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informant, the Walker book, where we refer to news headlines back in 74, 75, that the government is going to drop everything. But back then, everything was moving so slow. All the research was done by paper and pen. You had to send people documents. You didn't make phone calls very much because it cost so much money to make a phone call. And it was just moving at a snail's pace. So you'd have one case and everybody'd work on the Betty and Barney Hill thing. And that story would go on for years and everybody would be working on it. And it was moving so slow. It wasn't until 2017 that everything took off. And suddenly you had all these young people. I remember there's in the UFO community, we always used to go to the big conferences. There was 1,500 people. There was two things that were ever in the crowd. There was no African Americans. There may have been one or two African Americans in the crowd, and there was all old people. And we used to make, one guy was in the New Jersey conference. He's running New Jersey conference. Woman came and says, do you have a senior discount? He said, senior discount. If we had a senior discount, everybody get the discount. No, we don't have a senior discount. And that's the whole thing. It used to be all just old people, old white people that were doing at the UFO conferences. And now you have all sorts of people, young people, people who know how to use computer, people know how to generate stories and we have podcasts which have changed everything in terms of you can be the New York Times, you have a podcast that has millions. You even take a look at the telepathy tapes, which I think is the most important story I've ever seen come along, the telepathy tapes, because I'd written about this in some of my books. And you have that on Christmas Day, a podcast on telepathy gets 1.5 million views on Christmas Day. We're making headway. We're actually moving along here because that is a key part of the whole thing. I even asked Kai Dickens, the woman that broke there's a made public the story of the autistic kids who are 100% telepathic. I said, are any of them in contact with aliens? Because of this crossover thing that you're going to see crossovers. They're talking to dead people. They're speaking foreign languages. They're doing all these weird things that you see with multiple personality disorder, with psychic people. All all this stuff is the same thing. You'll see it all the time. And she said, there's only one. I'll let you know when I recontact the person. One of these kids that claimed that they were engaging with aliens. So that's the thing. They're in the field. They're able to shut down the left brain. But I think we're making a lot of headway. It's moving at breakneck speed. I just think that a lot of it is just entertainment. What Walker said, that we're spending most of our time on the entertainment value of what's the latest thing Grush says, what's the latest people in Congress, what's Congress doing, all this kind of stuff, instead of trying to figure out as Walker said, what are you going to do when you finally figure it out? Then that's what I say. Get past the fact, yes, UFOs exist. Get over it. Yeah, it's real. It's a real phenomenon. Okay, now what do we do now? Let's try to figure out who they are, what the message is, and there's not much time being spent on that. It's mostly on, you got any new UFO stories? You got any new things that have happened, sightings and stuff like that? And there's say 260,000 sightings in the database, and people have this sort of idea that if we get another 10,000 sightings, we're going to figure it out. Or you're not going to figure it out. You're going to go for another 80 years and waste another 80 years looking at sightings and lights in the sky. That's not getting us anywhere. You got to talk to the people that are talking to the intelligence behind the phenomena, and that is being ignored. Even at the Seoul conference, which is the big conference, they may change now because of the psionics thing, but they said they were going to keep the woo out of it. The woo. We don't need woo because we're Rodney Dangerfield. Everybody's laughing at us. We want to be cool. We're at Stanford University. All these big professors are there and stuff like that. So we don't want to sound stupid. We don't want to let Whitley Strieber speak there or anything like that. So they cut out that. And they said, first we're gonna prove to people that there's a nuts and bolts phenomenon, and then we'll bring up the consciousness. They don't deny the consciousness thing is real and important. We'll bring that up later. But to me, you're not going to, until you bring the consciousness thing, you're going to waste 80 years doing more sightings, because sightings tell you, yes, there are, especially now with the sightings are changing to orbs. And I say, with orbs, I started the orbology group, and we have access that we know at least 1 million cases of orbs that people are seeing. And Bob Bigelow is working on orbs and stuff like that. But that just tells you that orbs are real. You got to get past that and talk to the people who are engaging the phenomena, which is what the government did with Chris Bledsoe. They went to Chris Bledsoe and he was mad. Why these people on my property here? You're ruining my family's life. What's you guys all doing here? And he said, well, Chris, it appears that they have contact with you. They seem to like you, Chris. They don't like us talking to us. So we're here and we want to find out what they're saying. And that's the whole thing. You got to go to those people who are engaging the phenomena and say, who are we dealing with? Why are we dealing with them? And then you get this more sort of a non-local story, that everything is non-local, everything is consciousness, and you got to go there to start to understand what this is all about.
I'll just add in there, Grant. I agree, and I think the Bledsoe story, especially the origin, is fascinating. I think people have to be careful, though, that they don't go so far that every single thing they see is an orb, because there are videos being put online by the Bledsoes that aren't orbs, that are satellites and the space station at times.
Okay,
and I think there's a danger that people dive into that, and that can be harmful.
Okay, but again, we were splitting it. So yes, that's why I say that's a waste of time. You can watch all Chris Bledsoe's orbs, and some of them are, and some of them aren't, or whatever. But that's what we're doing. We're wasting our time looking at pictures of orbs on video because, oh, it's so cool. And then say, well, I've discovered this one isn't an orb. You got to get past the orbs, past the lights in the sky, and get to asking Chris about what's actually going on. Yep. What did Tim Taylor actually tell you? Because I can tell you two stories, and we can maybe end with this. I can tell you 2 stories. I don't remember if this actually happened, but it was weird. Chris Bledsoe was at a conference. I was at a conference with him in Maine, and he had gotten this ability after the dog incident with me to be able to heal people. And he told me the story. We were at this conference, and he said these 2 women came up, and they were in their 70s, and they were twins. And one had had a stroke, and she couldn't hear anymore, and she wanted a healing. And he said, I was standing out in front of the hotel, and Tim Taylor emailed me and said, you're in front of a hotel, and somebody wants a healing. Go ahead and do it. I said, Tim Taylor emailed you that? Texted you that? And he said, yeah. And then we went for lunch, and these 2 women, the young girls that wanted to talk to him about a healing or something like that. And so I left. They were just the last 2 in the restaurant. I left, and I knew it was going to happen. And the girl came back. She was crying. She was telling the story about, the fact that Tim Taylor had emailed and says, if you're in a restaurant and anybody ever asks for something, go ahead and do it. And I said, really? And I'm going like, holy cow. You see, this story is way more complex about Tim Taylor and about the consciousness thing and some of the stuff that goes on. It's just like mind-boggling. But the orbs in the sky, I agree. You can sit there and watch Chris Bledsoe's orbs for the next 80 years. That's what people are doing. That's why I said we got to get past the nuts and bolts thing and get to the consciousness thing, because you're never going to solve it with the nuts. Even Lukatsky said that. He said we can do this forever. We're never going to discover anything. He actually admitted this, that it's not going anywhere, especially if all the UFOs are different. Or the one at Skinwalker Ranch. You know the story at Skinwalker Ranch, Colm Kelleher tells. They got 6 guys. So these are investigators. They got Gen 3 glasses. They got the top night vision goggles that you can get legally in the United States. And they're sitting there, and the UFO comes over the ridge and flies right over these guys. And all these scientists or whoever they are watch this thing as it flies by. And at the end of the night, they make the report, and everybody saw something different. How are you going to solve anything by looking at lights in the sky? And I've had the one at Shasta where I had 8 people inside a Zendra, where there's aliens inside the Zendra, and I'm interviewing these people. What do you see? Oh, I saw this 10-foot guy, and he was a hologram, and you could see through him, and you could see the trees through him, and it's 2 beings beside him. You could see the trees through him, and everybody said the same thing. And then the one guy who was the interpreter, I said, hey, you were inside there. Did you see Antarel? He said, yeah, can't believe it. There's extraterrestrials from another planet. I just can't believe this is going on. I've never seen anything in my life. I said, so he was a hologram. He said, hologram? What the hell are you talking about? A hologram? I said, well, everybody said he was a hologram. The first year, 2014, he wasn't a hologram. 2015, when you were in there, he was a hologram. He said, look, Grant, I was close after him. I could see the lines in his face. It was a hologram. You see this whole thing that we are part of what we're observing. We think that everybody's observing the same thing. And this phenomena is able to morph. It's able to change to whatever it wants. And it's able to appear as whatever it wants. Even the first guy, Jim Sparks, who was a guy that came up with the idea of screen imaging. He talked about this to John Mack, who was investigating. He came up with where the alien comes as this military guy, and he says, "You're not some military guy." He says, "You're just screen imaging, fooling me, man. In fact, you haven't even got the right uniform on." He said, as soon as he said that, boom, the uniform changed to the right uniform instantaneously. And that's the whole thing. We got to realize we're part of what we're observing here. We are not independent of this phenomena. And it's going to be way more non-local, maybe more spiritual than you think it is. It's not going to be as nuts and bolts as people think it is. Or as Jim Semivan says, because you got nuts and bolts, crafts and bodies, doesn't mean you know what you're dealing with. And he's hinting it may not be extraterrestrial. And that's Jacques Vallée's come to that conclusion. The more I look, I'm writing a book called Extraterrestrial, or Maybe Not, an entire book that looks at all the weird things that, if the aliens in your last lifetime, well, lots of people report the aliens in your last lifetime. Chris Bledsoe reported that. If the aliens in your last lifetime, we got a problem with the material world. You got to reconsider what's really going on here if the aliens in your last lifetime.
Well, a nice place to finish, absolutely. And a couple of listener questions that will actually wrap things up because they are about you. And Rod was asking, are you attending this year's Contact in the Desert?
I wouldn't dare go in the States. I'd be in a El Salvador prison by the end of the day. I've had interactions with Homeland Security about 5 times. I was sent back one time. There's not a chance I'm going anywhere near the United States.
Well, on that though, if someone was attending something like a Contact in the Desert, what's your advice for people going along for perhaps the first time to those kinds of events?
Engage with the people, because the events, especially Contact in the Desert, is a big deal. Everybody's there. You can actually interact with people. So if Whitley Strieber's there, or Grush is there or something like that. They actually sit around at night, and everybody goes to the bar and drinks, and that's when you start to hear. I remember Stephen Greer was like that, where I'd say, don't watch Stephen Greer's lecture. Go when you got him off camera, and then he starts using names and he starts swearing and stuff like that. And because he's much more open, and all the researchers are much more open. You'll hear them tell stories in hotel rooms and stuff like that that they would never tell on stage. So engage with the speakers. They're very open to talk to people, and you realize they're just ordinary people, and it gets rid of a lot of the animosity. We got a lot in the UFO community where people are fighting, but when you actually go to these conferences and you meet the people that you were fighting with, and you realize, hey, it's not a bad guy, and all that stuff sort of fades away. That everybody's on the same page. It's a very exciting place to be. It's you come out of there, you're on cloud nine, you're bouncing around, and then you have to come down when you come home. When you suddenly realize, like, you come home and you tell these stories, and everybody's eyes roll back, and they say, is there anything else we can talk about other than UFOs? Because it's a world where you can go there, even if there's contact events. If I don't know if Contact in the Desert has it, but a lot of them have these experiencer events in the morning where you'll have all the people before the event starts go into a room, and there'll be 150 people in the room, and people crying about their experience and what they experienced and stuff like that. That's very powerful stuff. And those people will go every year, not for the lectures or anything. They just go for this contact event because this is their family. These are people that relate to them, that can understand what they're saying. Their family doesn't believe them. I've had a number where the family tried to lock them up and stuff like that. And here they're understood, and they have a group that supports them. And that's a very important part of conferences. But to get to talk to the speakers, you'll get close to them and ask them questions, and you get to know them as individuals, and they'll tell stories that they would never tell on stage.
And also, Karen had asked about your YouTube channel. Obviously, you've mentioned White House UFO. People can search Grant Cameron White House UFO and it'll come up. But she also listens to the podcast section and was going to ask, are you adding any more of the audio podcast? Because she listens to it rather than watches it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm going to I've got a pile. Like I'm not a technical guy, but I've got maybe 10. So I may do 10 weeks where I'll set up. I've got them all, but I have to, I put the beginning and the end and all that sort of stuff. And I'm always so busy researching and doing stuff like that I don't get much time. But the one thing that I can mention is all my books are now in audio. There's so a lot of people always say, oh, I don't. People are dyslexic or something. They don't read books or something, and it is true. Reading books is sort of like a thing of the past, where people, even I don't really read the books. I'll go through the index and I'll look up stuff, and I may read parts of books and stuff like that. But it's a different world. It's an audio world. So the audio podcast I'll try to get up because it was going pretty good there, and then you just get sort of tied down with doing this and doing that, and I sort of let it go. But guys like you are doing a good job in terms of getting. I spend a lot of time, like I walk 4 hours a day, so I'll have all your back lectures, and I'll listen to all your lectures and pick up on stuff. And I listen to podcasts probably 7-8 hours a day. So you guys that are doing the podcasts are doing a fantastic job, and people are learning from these things. They are, picking up new material, and I think working together, the consciousness will rise, and we'll move along because we're moving pretty fast now. It's all you got to do is get in missions that there's bodies and crafts, and then we're going to hopefully get to the point of, okay, who are these beings? What are they doing here? How do they get here? And that's the important part of the situation of why would so many beings of so many different types suddenly show up on planet Earth? There's a very important reason for that.
Well, folks, all those links will be in the description for the podcast. Grant, thank you so much for your time. I would love people go and check out Beyond Managing Magic 2, Landing the Plane, and the other books in the series. They'll all be at those clickable links below. And thank you very much, mate. Pleasure speaking to you.
Beautiful. Thank you for your time and for your interest in what I'm doing.